secrets we carry like invisible scars, marks known only to us that haunt us in the quietest hours of the night. Marcus Thompson knew this weight well. At 33, he had learned to live with a truth few could bear. With each full moon, his humanity melted away like wet paper, giving way to something primal, hungry, and uncontrollable. That October night, as golden leaves danced beneath the yellow light of Chicago's streetlights, Marcus walked the streets with the same restlessness that had haunted him for years. The moon was waxing, and he could feel it tugging at something inside him, like an invisible chain tied to his gut. His steps led him, almost automatically, to Murphy's Pub, a corner bar where the music wasn't too loud and where he could lose himself among strangers without being disturbed. The establishment reeked of the distinctive aroma of aged wood and spilled beer. Marcus chose a stool at the end of the bar, away from the lively chatter of the other patrons. The bartender, a middle-aged man with tattooed arms, slid a bottle of beer toward him without him having to ask. It was a routine the two had established over the past few months. Marcus watched the people around him with the gaze of someone always alert, always calculating distances and exits. It was a habit developed out of necessity, a form of protection for both himself and others. He knew that when the transformation came, there would be no control, no mercy, only pure instinct and bloodlust. Then she appeared, a woman with brown hair that fell in soft waves over her shoulders, wearing a black leather coat that hugged her delicate figure. Her eyes were a deep, almost hypnotic green, and there was something about them that sent a shiver down Marcus's spine. She approached the bar with the confidence of someone who knew the place, ordering a whiskey neat from the bartender in a voice that sounded like velvet on broken glass. Her name was Elena, Marcus discovered when she struck up a conversation naturally, as if they were old acquaintances reuniting after years. There was a strange familiarity in the way she looked at him, as if she could see through the layers of secrets he had built around himself. Marcus felt simultaneously drawn and alarmed by this mysterious woman who had appeared in his life like a silent storm. As the evening wore on, Marcus discovered that Elena had a peculiar way of getting him to talk about things he normally kept under lock and key. She didn't ask direct questions, but there was something about her presence that made him vulnerable, as if his usual defenses simply dissolved. They talked about the city, work. He was a freelance photographer, a profession that allowed him to disappear when necessary, and the loneliness that seemed to be a constant in both their lives. Elena told him she had recently moved to Chicago from somewhere she didn't fully specify. There was a deliberate vagueness to her words, as if she too carried heavy secrets. Marcus noticed she skillfully dodged certain questions, redirecting the conversation with the mastery of someone accustomed to hiding truths. What intrigued him most was the way she watched him. Her green eyes seemed to map his every expression, every gesture, as if she were studying him for some purpose he couldn't fathom. There were times when Marcus felt she knew exactly what he was thinking, a disturbing sensation that made him wonder if he was being too transparent. During a lull in the conversation, as Elena absently stirred her glass of whiskey, Marcus noticed something strange. Her nails were slightly longer than usual, and there was something in her posture, a subtle tension in her shoulders, that reminded him of himself in the days before the transformation. It was as if she were holding something back, fighting some inner force that threatened to escape. The attraction between them grew with every word exchanged, with every gaze held for a few seconds longer than socially acceptable. Marcus knew he was playing with fire, that getting involved with anyone was a recipe for disaster. But there was something about Elena that made him forget his own rules, that made him want to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could have a normal life. When she suggested they go to her apartment, Marcus felt his heart race. The full moon was still a few days away, he mentally calculated, so maybe it would be safe. Maybe he could have a night of normalcy, a night where he could pretend to be just an ordinary man interested in a fascinating woman. Eleanor's apartment was in an old building on the north side of the city, with dimly lit hallways and the kind of heavy silence that echoed every footstep. Marcus followed her up the stairs, watching the graceful movement of her hips, the way she ascended the steps with an almost feline ease. There was something predatory in her movements, an elegance reminiscent of wild animals hunting in the darkness. Elena's apartment reflected her enigmatic personality. The walls were painted in dark, almost black tones, and the minimalist decor created deep shadows that seemed to move with the flickering light of the candle she lit as soon as they entered. There was something ritualistic about the way she prepared the room, as if she were following a specific protocol that Marcus didn't understand. They sat on the dark leather sofa, and Elena poured more whiskey into crystal glasses that refracted the light from the flames hypnotically. Their physical proximity intensified the tension between them, and Marcus could feel the heat emanating from her body, a heat that seemed more intense than usual. When she leaned in to run her fingers through his hair, he caught a wild scent on her skin, something that reminded him of deep forests and moonless nights. The kiss happened naturally, as if it had been inevitable since the moment they met at the bar. But there was something different about the way Elena kissed him, an intensity bordering on hunger, as if she were tasting him rather than just kissing him. Marcus felt a shiver run down his spine when she lightly bit his lower lip, and for a moment he had the strange sensation that her teeth were sharper than they should have been. They moved toward the bedroom in a dance of desire and mutual discovery. Eleanor's hands explored his body with a disturbing familiarity, as if she already knew him intimately. Marcus tried to ignore the strange sensation, surrendering himself to the moment and the illusion of normalcy it provided. For a few hours, he managed to forget the monster sleeping inside him, losing himself in the unbridled passion Eleanor aroused. But it was during the early morning hours, when Marcus woke thirsty and headed to the kitchen, that his reality began to fracture in disturbing ways. Moonlight streamed through the window, creating silvery patterns on the floor, and it was in this light that he saw her. Elena was standing by the window, completely naked, but her silhouette had changed. Her spine was more arched, her arms seemed longer, and there was something about her posture that wasn't quite human. Marcus froze in the hallway, his heart pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. Elena turned her head toward him with a movement so fluid, almost otherworldly, and her green eyes glowed in the darkness with a luminescence all their own. For a terrifying, revelatory moment, Marcus saw something familiar in those eyes. The same wild glow he recognized in himself during his transformations. She smiled, and even in the dim light, Marcus could see that her canines were more prominent, sharper. Elena knew he was watching, and there was something triumphant in her expression, as if she'd just won a game whose rules only she knew. Marcus retreated silently to his room, feigning sleep when she returned, but his blood was ice cold, and his mind raced in 1,000 different directions. The days that followed were an exercise in growing paranoia for Marcus. Elena had become a constant presence in his life, appearing at unexpected moments with a punctuality that bordered on the impossible. She knew where he would be before he even decided, as if she could track his movements through some sense he didn't understand. Marcus began to question every chance encounter, every coincidence that brought them together. During the day, Elena seemed completely normal. They ate lunch together in small cafes, walked through the city parks, visited art galleries where Marcus feigned interest in the exhibitions while watching her every move through the reflections in the glass. But there were moments, small lapses, when the mask slipped. a low growl when someone bumped into her on the street, the way her eyes fixed on the necks of passers-by, the way she sniffed the air like an animal scenting a trail. Marcus tried to keep his distance, making excuses to avoid meeting up, but Eleanor had a persuasive way of appearing just when he was most vulnerable. It was as if she could sense his weaknesses, his moments of deepest loneliness, and chose precisely those moments to reappear in his life. He began to suspect it was no coincidence that there was something predatory in the way she surrounded him. The moon was waxing, and with it, Marcus's restlessness intensified. His animal instincts began to awaken earlier than usual, a constant sense of alert that made him question every shadow, every sound in the darkness. It was during these sleepless nights that he best noticed the strange signs in Elena's behavior. The way she never seemed tired, how her reflexes were lightning fast, how she always knew things he hadn't told her. One night, Marcus decided to follow her. Elena had mentioned she had some business downtown, and he pretended to be busy with work. But as soon as she left, he grabbed his camera and followed her through the dark streets, keeping just enough distance to avoid detection. What he saw disturbed him even more. Elena didn't go downtown. Instead, she headed to the suburbs, to an abandoned industrial area where few ventured after dark. Marcus watched her from afar as she walked between the empty warehouses with the confidence of someone who knows every shadow, every hiding place. She stopped in front of a private warehouse, looked around carefully, and then entered. Marcus waited a few minutes before approaching, using his experience as a photographer to move silently among the metal structures. What he found when he managed to peek through the dirty window made him question everything he thought he knew about reality. Elena stood in the center of the empty warehouse, but she wasn't alone. Other figures moved in the shadows, silhouettes that seemed human at first glance but carried the same otherworldly quality he'd noticed about her. They communicated through gestures and low sounds that Marcus couldn't fully decipher. But there was a clear organization, a hierarchy that Elena seemed to command. It was then that Marcus realized he had stumbled upon something much bigger than a simple, dangerous attraction. Elena wasn't just a woman with dark secrets. She was part of something organized, something specifically targeting him. The realization hit him like a punch in the gut. He hadn't met Elena by chance at the bar. She had hunted him. The discovery changed everything about Marcus's perception of recent events. Every moment they had shared, every intimate conversation, every night of passion. It had all been carefully orchestrated. Elena was studying him, mapping his weaknesses, his patterns, his secrets. But why? Marcus returned home with more questions than answers, his mind spinning in circles as he tried to decipher her true intentions. In the following days, Marcus completely changed his routine. He avoided the places where he usually met Elena, altered his schedule, and took different routes home. But his precautions seemed futile. Elena kept showing up, always with a plausible explanation, always with that smile he now recognized as predatory. She showed no sign of noticing his surveillance of the warehouse, maintaining the same facade of genuine romantic interest. The full moon was inexorably approaching, and Marcus knew he needed to isolate himself completely. Whenever he felt the transformation coming, he would lock himself away in a secluded cabin in the mountains, far from any possibility of harming innocents. But this time, there was Elena to consider. How could he disappear without arousing suspicion? How could he protect his darkest secret from someone who clearly had mysteries of her own? Marcus decided to try a direct approach, even though he knew it was risky. He invited Elena to dinner at his apartment, planning to confront her about his true intentions. She arrived punctually, carrying a bottle of red wine and wearing a dress that hugged her curves almost hypnotically. During the meal, Marcus tried several times to broach the subject, but Elena skillfully deflected any more specific questions about his past or his nocturnal activities. It was during dessert that she finally let her guard down, perhaps sensing Marcus's growing tension. Elena watched him for a long moment, her green eyes studying every line of his face as if making an important decision. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a different quality, deeper, more menacing. Elena admitted she'd known about his condition since their first meeting at the bar. She could smell the beast in him. She could recognize the signs others missed. Marcus felt the world crumble around him when she revealed she wasn't alone, that there were others like her in the city, others who knew about creatures like him. The organization Marcus had seen in the warehouse was real, and Elena was just the tip of the iceberg. But what disturbed him most was discovering that Elena wasn't entirely human either. She wasn't a werewolf like him, but something different, something she described only as related. Marcus understood that there were different kinds of monsters roaming the streets, different kinds of dark secrets hidden beneath human appearances. Elena was part of a group that monitored these creatures, catalogued them, and controlled them when necessary. Marcus asked if she was there to eliminate him, if the whole relationship had been an elaborate charade to get closer to her prey. Elena smiled, but there was sadness in her eyes as she replied that the situation was more complicated than that. She had started out as a hunter, but something had changed during their time together. Marcus didn't know if he could trust her, if the emotions he saw on her face were genuine or just another layer of her elaborate performance. The full moon was only 2 nights away, and Marcus could feel the beast stirring restlessly beneath his skin. His hands trembled slightly, his senses heightened, and there was a constant metallic taste in his mouth. Elena remained in his apartment after the revelation, observing him with a new intensity, like a scientist studying a rare specimen about to undergo metamorphosis. Marcus tried to explain to Elena what happened during his transformations, how he completely lost control, how the beast that emerged knew no morality or mercy. He told her about the mornings waking up covered in blood that wasn't his own, about the fragments of violent memories that haunted him, about the constant terror of discovering he'd hurt someone innocent. Elena listened silently, without judgment, but also without surprise, as if she already knew everything. When Marcus mentioned his mountain cabin, the place where he secluded himself during full moons, Elena showed particular interest. She asked about its location, the precautions he took, how much time he spent there. Marcus hesitated to elaborate, his paranoia whispering that she might still be gathering information for her mysterious companions, but there was something in her eyes that seemed genuinely concerned for his well-being. Elena then revealed that her organization wasn't exactly hunters, as Marcus had feared. They were more like guardians, monitoring supernatural creatures to prevent public exposure or massacres that might reveal the existence of the hidden world. Some members of the group were humans aware of the supernatural reality, but others, like her, were hybrids or creatures who had learned to control their darker natures. The revelation brought a terrifying new perspective to Marcus. If an entire organization was monitoring creatures like him, how many other people in his life might be undercover? How many of the familiar faces in his everyday life were hiding secrets similar to his own? The paranoia he thought he had under control exploded into a cascade of doubts about everything and everyone around him. Elena sensed his growing anxiety and tried to reassure him, explaining that he was under no immediate threat. Her organization only intervened when there was a real risk to innocent humans or when a creature completely lost control. Marcus had been careful over the years, always isolating himself during transformations, never allowing the beast to cause irreparable damage. This placed him in the category of passive monitoring rather than active elimination. But Elena also admitted there were complications. Some creatures in Chicago had recently begun acting more recklessly, drawing unwanted attention from human authorities. The organization was under pressure to clean up the situation, and that meant all creatures in the area were being re-evaluated. Marcus understood that his period of relative peace was coming to an end, that he would have to prove his self-control or face consequences she didn't fully specify. The irony of the situation was not lost on Marcus. He had spent years fearing the discovery of his secret, only to discover it had long been known. His entire life had been an illusion of privacy, a theater where he thought he was the only actor, when in fact, there was an entire audience watching his every move. The feeling of violation was almost unbearable. The night of the full moon arrived like an inevitable storm. Marcus could feel every fiber of his being vibrating with a primordial energy that threatened to explode at any moment. Elena had insisted on accompanying him to the cabin, claiming she needed to observe his transformation for her official report. Marcus wasn't sure whether to believe her, but he also didn't have the energy to argue. With each passing minute, humanity slipped through his fingers like fine sand. During the trip to the mountains, Elena revealed more details about her own nature. She was a hybrid, the result of a union between a supernatural creature and a human. Her transformation didn't follow lunar cycles like Marcus's, but was triggered by extreme emotions or dangerous situations. She had learned to control these changes through decades of training, something she offered to teach Marcus if he survived the evaluation. The cabin sat isolated in the middle of a dense forest built specifically to contain the beast that Marcus was becoming. The windows were barricaded with steel, the doors locked from the outside, and chains were attached to the walls for extreme cases. Marcus showed Elena the arrangements he had made, explaining how his containment system worked. She observed everything with a professional eye, making mental notes that he knew would be reported later. As the sun set, Marcus began to feel the first waves of pain that preceded the transformation. His bones felt as if they were expanding from within, his muscles contracting and stretching in impossible ways. Elena helped him into the main room of the cabin, checking the chains and locks one last time. Marcus asked her to stay outside during the transformation, fearing what the beast might do if it detected his presence. But Elena refused, claiming she needed to document the entire process. Marcus tried to argue, explaining that she didn't truly understand the danger, that the creature he transformed into wouldn't recognize any emotional connection between them. Elena remained firm, revealing that she had brought her own protective methods, resources her organization had developed specifically to deal with situations like this. The transformation began with a violence that surprised even Marcus. Normally, the process was gradual, painful, but controlled. This time, it was as if something was accelerating the change, forcing it to happen more quickly. Marcus screamed as his bones broke and reformed, as his face elongated into a snout, as claws emerged from his fingers, tearing at his skin. Elena watched with a scientific fascination that Marcus found disturbing. She took notes in a small notebook, occasionally whispering observations in a language he didn't recognize. When the transformation reached its peak, when Marcus ceased to exist and only the beast remained, Elena did something unexpected. She began to transform as well. Elena's transformation was different from Marcus's, more fluid, more controlled. Her limbs lengthened gracefully, her skin took on a grayish hue, and her eyes became completely black. She retained more of her human form than Marcus, but there was something unmistakably predatory about her new appearance. The beast Marcus had become growled menacingly, recognizing another predator in its territory. What followed was a deadly dance between two creatures operating on completely instinctual levels. Elena, even transformed, retained some conscious control, using it to study the beast's behavior patterns. Marcus had no conscious memory of what transpired during those hours, but he woke the next morning with scratches and bites that hadn't been there before, evidence of a confrontation he couldn't fully recall. Marcus awoke naked on the cabin floor, his body aching and covered in marks that told a story his mind couldn't fully comprehend. Elena sat in a nearby chair, back in her human form, watching him with an expression that mixed scientific concern with something he couldn't quite identify. She had prepared clean clothes for him and fresh water, gestures of care that contrasted strangely with the surreal situation they found themselves in. As Marcus slowly dressed, trying to process fragments of memories from the previous night, Elena began to explain what she had observed. His transformation had been more violent than expected, suggesting something was influencing his condition externally. She suspected that the proximity of other supernatural creatures in the city might be affecting all beings like them, intensifying their transformations and making them more difficult to control. Marcus asked about his own injuries, about what had happened during the hours he couldn't remember. Elena hesitated before answering, choosing her words carefully. She admitted that she had tested his limits, provoking the beast to gauge its aggression patterns and hunting instincts. Marcus felt a mixture of anger and betrayal, realizing he had been used as a guinea pig in an experiment he hadn't consented to. But Elena also revealed something that changed her perspective on everything. During the transformation, when the beast had become particularly aggressive, it had displayed something unusual. Instead of simply attacking blindly, the creature had shown moments of hesitation, as if some part of Marcus's consciousness was still present. This was rare among werewolves, according to Elena, and could indicate that he had the potential to develop conscious control over his transformations. The possibility of control was something Marcus had fantasized about for years, but had never dared to believe it was possible. Elena explained that her organization had developed training techniques for creatures that demonstrated this ability, methods that could allow him to maintain his humanity even during transformations. But this training would come at a price. He would have to work with the organization, helping to monitor and control other creatures who had not developed the same self-control. Marcus was torn between the hope for a better life and the fear of becoming part of the same system that had secretly monitored him for so long. Elena sensed his hesitation and didn't press for an immediate response. She explained that he had time to consider the offer, but also warned that the situation in Chicago was rapidly deteriorating. Other creatures were losing control, and soon the organization would be forced to take more drastic measures. During the drive back to town, Marcus observed Elena with new eyes. She was no longer just the mysterious woman who had awakened his passion, nor simply the disguised hunter he had feared. She was something in between, a creature like himself who had found a way to navigate between worlds, to maintain both her humanity and her supernatural nature in some kind of precarious balance. But Marcus also sensed that Elena was hiding something more, something she hadn't fully revealed. There were moments during her explanations when her eyes would wander, when her voice carried a subtle hesitation that suggested intentional omissions. Marcus suspected the organization she represented had more complex goals than simply maintaining peace between humans and supernatural creatures. When they arrived back at Marcus's apartment, Elena prepared to leave, mentioning that she needed to report her findings to her superiors. Marcus asked when he would see her again, if the training offer was still available. and if there would be consequences for her hesitation in accepting immediately. Elena smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes he hadn't noticed before. She explained that the coming weeks would be decisive for everyone like them in the city. Changes were coming, changes that would affect not just individual creatures but the entire secret structure that had allowed human and supernatural worlds to coexist. Marcus understood that regardless of his decision to work with the organization, his life would never be the same. Elena left, leaving Marcus with more questions than answers, more fears than hopes. He stood at his apartment window, watching her disappear into the crowds of the Chicago streets, knowing he had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. His darkest secret was no longer his alone. His life was no longer private, and the future that awaited him was as uncertain as it was terrifying. In the nights that followed, Marcus found himself watching the shadows with new eyes, questioning every stranger who crossed his path, wondering how many other supernatural secrets lay hidden within the familiar streets of his town. Elena had opened a door to a world he had never imagined, a world where creatures like them lived double lives, where secret organizations pulled invisible strings, where the line between protection and control was dangerously thin. The moon was beginning a new cycle, and Marcus knew that when it reached its fullest again, everything would be different. Elena had planted seeds of possibility in his mind, but also of paranoia and fear. He wasn't sure if what she had offered was salvation or just a more sophisticated prison, if her organization truly protected creatures like them or simply controlled them more efficiently. Marcus Thompson had met a girl at a bar, but discovered that neither of them slept with simple secrets. Now, as he looked out over the nighttime streets of Chicago, he realized that his story with Elena was just beginning, and that the secrets they both carried were merely the surface of something much deeper and more dangerous. In the weeks following their encounter at the cabin, Marcus developed an obsessive routine of observation. He began mentally cataloging every person he encountered, looking for the subtle signs Elena had taught him to recognize. The way someone sniffed the air discreetly, reflexes that were slightly too quick, eyes that glowed strangely in certain lights. Chicago, which had previously seemed like an ordinary city full of ordinary humans, now revealed hidden layers of otherworldly complexity. Elena appeared sporadically, always at unexpected moments, as if she could sense when Marcus was most vulnerable to loneliness and doubt. Their encounters had changed in character. There was no longer the pretense of casual romance, but neither were they purely professional. There was a strange intimacy between them now, the closeness of two predators who recognized each other, who shared secrets few on Earth could understand. During one of these chance encounters at a downtown cafe, Elena mentioned that other creatures were being monitored in the area, some of which were exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior. Marcus asked if she knew these other creatures personally, if there was a hidden community he should be aware of. Elena smiled enigmatically and replied that he would find out soon enough, that some revelations couldn't be forced. The next full moon was approaching again, and Marcus felt the familiar unease growing in his bones. But this time there was something different, an anticipation that wasn't just dread. Elena had suggested he try to maintain some awareness during the transformation, to focus on his human identity even as the beast emerged. It was a terrifying concept, maintaining consciousness during acts he'd rather forget. But it also offered a possibility of control he'd never considered. Marcus decided to try the experiment, but not in the isolated cabin. Elena had suggested a different location, an abandoned warehouse in the industrial district that her organization had specifically prepared for this type of controlled test. The site was equipped with surveillance cameras and restraint devices more sophisticated than his rudimentary chains. But there were also human observers who would document everything. On the appointed night, Marcus arrived at the warehouse to discover he was not alone. Besides Elena and 2 technicians she introduced only by false names, there was another creature waiting. He was an older man, perhaps in his 50s, with graying hair and eyes that carried the same weight of dark secrets that Marcus recognized within himself. Elena introduced him as David, another werewolf who had undergone the same evaluation process years before. David explained his own journey in a weary but compassionate voice. He had initially resisted the organization, tried to escape its monitoring, but eventually understood that cooperating offered benefits that a solitary life could never provide. He had learned not only to control his transformations, but to use his enhanced abilities to help others like them. There was purpose in his existence now, something beyond simple survival and concealment. But Marcus also detected something unspoken in David's words, a resignation that suggested the choices the organization offered were not as free as Elena had implied. David had found purpose, yes, but he had also lost something, an autonomy, a freedom of choice that Marcus was not yet ready to relinquish. The transformation that night was unlike any before. With David offering telepathic guidance, a skill Marcus hadn't known was possible among werewolves, he was able to maintain fragments of human consciousness even as his body contorted into its beastly form. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus had clear memories of what happened during his transformation, and these memories were simultaneously liberating and terrifying. He remembered the intense hunger, the primal urge to hunt and kill, but he also remembered choosing not to act on those impulses. He remembered Elena watching him with eyes that blended professional pride and something that might have been genuine affection. He remembered David communicating with him through methods that transcended human language, offering anchors of humanity when the beast threatened to take complete control. When he awoke the next morning, Marcus knew he had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. He had proven to himself and the organization that he could control his supernatural nature. But this control came at the cost of never again being able to completely ignore the monster that lived within him. Ignorance had been a cruel form of mercy, and now he would have to live with the full memory of his darkest instincts. Elena seemed pleased with the results, but Marcus noticed a new tension in her posture, as if something had changed overnight that he didn't fully understand. When he asked about the next steps, about when she would begin the formal training she had mentioned, Elena hesitated in a way that set alarm bells ringing in his mind. She explained that there were political complications within the organization, different factions with differing philosophies on how to deal with creatures like Marcus and David. Some members believed in integration and cooperation, but others favored more direct methods of maintaining control. Marcus was being drawn into the middle of a supernatural Cold War he knew nothing about until recently. David acknowledged Marcus's concerns with a somber nod. He explained that the organization wasn't the uniform entity Elena had initially presented. There were complex hierarchies, conflicting agendas, and creatures like them often found themselves pawns in political games far larger than their individual lives. David had survived navigating these waters for years, but he admitted that the situation was becoming more precarious for everyone involved. Marcus realized that Elena hadn't just recruited him. She'd placed him at the center of a conflict that could determine the fate of every supernatural creature in the region. His newfound ability to maintain conscious control made him valuable to multiple factions, each with different plans for his talents. Elena was trying to protect him, but her options were limited by forces beyond her control. The final realization came when Marcus discovered that Elena had not chosen to approach him by chance or even by superior orders. She had volunteered for his mission because she recognized something in him that resonated with her own experience. the struggle to maintain humanity in the face of a nature that constantly pushed toward brutality. Elena had seen in Marcus an opportunity not only to recruit a valuable asset, but perhaps to find someone who could truly understand the sacrifices her way of life demanded. But this revelation also brought a disturbing realization. Elena was as trapped as he was in the system she represented. Her choices were limited by obligations she couldn't simply ignore, by loyalties forged over decades of mutual dependence. Marcus realized that if he chose to work with the organization, he wouldn't just be saving his own life. He would potentially be condemning Elena to a life she might question as much as he did. The full moon passed, but the transformations that had occurred in Marcus were permanent. He could no longer feign ignorance of the supernatural world that existed parallel to human reality. He could no longer live in isolation, pretending his problems affected only himself. Elena had opened a door that could not be closed, revealed truths that could not be forgotten. In the days that followed, Marcus began to notice more signs of the organization's presence in his daily life. Discreet cameras in places he frequented, people who appeared repeatedly in different contexts, conversations that abruptly stopped when he approached. He was being monitored more intensively than ever, but now he knew it, which somehow made the situation simultaneously more and less terrifying. Elena continued to show up regularly, but their encounters had taken on a desperate quality, as if she were trying to memorize every moment they spent together. Marcus suspected changes were coming, changes that could tear them apart permanently, regardless of his choices about cooperating with the organization. Marcus Thompson had met a girl in a bar and discovered that the secrets they both carried were just the beginning of a web of supernatural conspiracy that stretched across the city. He had gained control over his monstrous nature, but lost control over his own life. Elena had offered answers, but each answer generated 10 new, more disturbing questions. Now, as he gazed out the Chicago streets from his apartment window, Marcus knew his story was far from over. The secrets he had uncovered were merely fragments of larger truths, and the choices he faced would determine not only his own fate, but possibly the balance between worlds most people would never know existed. The next full moon was only a few weeks away, and Marcus knew that when it arrived, everything would be different once again. Elena had promised him that he would have to make a definitive choice soon, but Marcus was beginning to suspect that his options were carefully constructed illusions, that the fate that awaited him had been decided long before he met that mysterious girl at Murphy's pub. Some secrets Marcus was learning were far bigger than the people who held them. And some chance encounters weren't chance at all, but rather pieces moving in a cosmic game where the rules were written by forces that remained eternally in the shadows, watching, waiting, planning their next move in a game that never truly ended.